Welcome, everyone, to our discussion of COVID-19's impact on crisis communications. We'll spend the next hour providing actionable strategies you can incorporate into client discussions. This is a challenging time for so many reasons. People are concerned about their health, their immediate cash flow needs, and their hard-earned savings. Today, we have a roundtable of experts to cover this from every angle. This has been an interesting couple of months for financial advisors. I was on the phone with a number of financial advisors this morning who were saying that they've gotten more appointments over the last 2 months than they've gotten over maybe the last 6 months. And that reiterates that these are the times that clients care most about the messaging that they're receiving from their financial advisor. There was a note this morning from someone who said, every country's favorite food is the food that they could rely on during a famine. And that's, I think, a good reminder that this is when people rely on you for some kind of messaging. And I think a lot of financial advisors feel like it's their job to solve this, that this is a problem to solve and not necessarily an opportunity to deepen a relationship. And I know, Deirdre, talk to us a little bit about how an advisor should approach speaking with a client, especially during times when emotions are raw.
Yeah, absolutely. So Dr. Martin Luther King once said, the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. And I bring up that quote to frame our conversation because the first step, I have a 3-step communicating in uncertain times process, Michael, which I'll go over with you. But the first step is really reflecting inward and asking yourself, how do I want to show up and lead during this time for my clients? And it's really about who you are and who you're being as a first step. Because if you want to try to reassure people or get them feeling okay, but you're all frantic and unconfident and feeling scared, that energy is going to show up in your conversations. So the first thing I'm telling my advisor clients to do is to very intentionally ask and answer this question: how do I want to show up right now for the people I lead? Another way you could ask it is, what energy do I want to bring to the table? Or when this is over, who do I want to say I was? So let me give you an example. When everything broke out, first, second week in March, I remember sitting there going, oh my gosh, my clients, that's my advisor clients, right? My leaders in the industry are the first responders to the economic crisis that our nation and our world is going through right now. And I thought, okay, this is going to affect me personally. I'm a professional speaker, right, Michael? I travel for a living. My whole family's from the East Coast. There's lots of ways this is affecting me personally. But I thought I got to put that aside. And when I'm interfacing with my clients, whether it's on a webinar like this, whether it's one-on-one or my own group training, I have to bring energy that's going to support them in being the first responder. And so I reflect on how I wanted to show up, and the way that I decided I want to show up, and I have been showing up during this time, is to be exceedingly encouraging and helpful. Exceedingly encouraging and helpful, Michael. So what I do is, before I get on any client interaction, whether I'm sending an email, I'm on something like this, I'm doing a client call, I tap into that energy and I remind myself, listen, forget about what just happened in your life 5 minutes ago. This is the energy you want to bring to the table. So that's step one. Any client questions or comments on that before I touch on the other 2 steps?
Well, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. You're trying to reassure a client that you have things in control.
Yeah, and if you don't have things in control, it's hard to reassure them, right? So you got to get into that space in place. The second is to use what I call affirming empathy. And this is a step that a lot of advisors miss, and I can see why they miss it, because they do, like you said, they want to solve the problem. right? They want to make it all better. That's the tendency when someone comes to us with a problem, we just want to make it all better. And so don't jump into the, I want to make it all better, I need to make it all better for you mode right away, or you'll miss that vital connection opportunity. So what you want to do is something my advisor did with me. So let me give you this illustration. So on February 21st, I made a large contribution to my SEP account. And on March 12th, I called my advisor, Eric, and I said, Eric, I got to tell you, I'm really bummed that I met with you and wrote that check on February 21st. I wish I was sitting with you today writing that check, or that I was writing that check 2 weeks from now when the markets might be down even more. And Michael, what would Eric's natural inclination to be? What would most advisors want to do in that moment?
Well, tell you everything's going to be okay.
Exactly. That's the natural thing. So don't do that. That's not the step you want to go to next. What you want to do in that moment, it's a beautiful moment to develop a relationship and that important emotional connection. So do what Eric did. And Eric said to me, and I call this affirming empathy. He said, Deirdre, I get it. And you know what? I wish you hadn't written that check 2 weeks ago too. I wish you were in my office right now, or were in my office 2 weeks from now. And I'll tell you what, in that moment, Michael, I felt we already have a great relationship, but I felt really connected. I felt like he got me. And as a human, he understood me, and he wasn't trying to sugarcoat it and pretend everything was fine. So affirm where they're at. Go ahead. You were going to say something, Michael.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, yeah, a big mistake I think advisors can make is to not be empathic toward your client. I mean, we all know that this is not our money, so we're not feeling the emotions that our client is feeling. And there may be a tendency to want to dismiss those emotions. Everything's going to be fine. Remember, with this, we're long run focused. But the reality is that those emotions exist, and you have to address those emotions. And it's not enough to simply try to dismiss them offhand.
Absolutely, because if you don't, they're going to feel like you're not connected to them, and they're going to end up looking for someone else down the road who is connected to them. One of the things clients really want is that emotional connection between themselves and their advisor. And then the third step, so here's the deal. Once you affirm them, you can't leave them there. Like Eric couldn't just leave me wallowing, right, about writing that check. He had to do the next step. And Christine, I think you're going to have some great tools for us on this. Christine and I, we call it different things, and I think you're going to go into this even deeper than me, but you're going to do what I call vision cast. So imagine going like fly fishing, right? Like you're casting a line out into the water far away from you. And so what you're going to do is you're going to vision cast, and you're going to bring them back to the long-term goals, right? You're going to get them away from, well, this is happening today, so everything's horrible. And you're going to get them remembering what the long-term goal is and how we're going to get there, and everything's going to be okay. And you can use, in my world, I would use a series of different types of stories. I would use analogies. I would use a historical perspective with stories woven in. I would use what I call transformational or results-driven language, but you want to cast that long view vision. And
Christine, we talked a little bit about this. When advisors are having a conversation with client, that there can be a tendency to dominate the conversation, especially if a client is being emotional, to try to guide the conversation toward where you want it to go. But listening is also an important part of this process.
It's essential. And Deirdre really hit on it, that as advisors, you're the one who knows your stuff, and the client really is hiring you to hear what you think about their situation. But a key part of getting your advice right is taking time to listen. I work on a podcast with my colleague, Jeff Patak, and we interviewed a professor and a researcher, Moira Summers, who Michael Kitces had recommended to us. And her main specialty is helping advisors help their clients improve their actual behaviors. So like, what are the things that get people to actually take the advice that you're giving them? And one of the key points that she made to us was, she said, advisors just need to hush. And we were like, what, hush? And she said, yes, just basically be quiet and listen to what the client has to say. And she has done research on this topic, actually dealing with doctors, but the phenomenon is similar, where they've timed doctors interacting with patients, and then ask the doctor, well, like what percentage of that conversation was the patient talking and what percentage were you talking? And they found that systematically the doctors tended to overestimate the time they were giving the patient, that they were doing most of the talking. And so I just think that's such a key piece of advice, to step back and listen. And we've all had a chance to watch public officials through this crisis. We've seen some really good communication skills and some poor ones. And I think one recurrent theme when we look at the good communicators through this is a tendency to indicate that they have listened, that they've absorbed what's going on in their communities. And all you have to do is really say it back to us. Like, I know it stinks to miss graduations. I know it's terrible to not be able to see your elderly mom. Just say back some of the things that you've observed, and that goes a long way toward helping people feel like you really are on their team and taking part with whatever they have going on in their lives.
That's a great point. You're really just signaling that you're listening, you're absorbing their feelings. And I do think that there is this tendency to want to jump in and interrupt. But the reality is that they're kind of testing you. They're testing your ability to be patient and listen and to value the opinion and the feelings of your clients.
I think if I can add to something, not going into you want to go into a meeting with a direction, but maybe not going in with an agenda. Right? I mean, if you have a half hour with a client and they need to talk for 25 minutes about how upset they are and they need to get that emotional piece out and they need you to be empathetic, don't feel like you have to rush them along to the solution. Maybe you need to schedule another call with them. If they're not ready to move along, kind of like you were saying, Christine, like give them that space to have that conversation with you. You will really deepen the relationship with them. You're going to deepen the relationship with them more about the emotional piece than probably about the money piece right now. Yeah, that's what I got on that.
And what about the money piece? Deirdre, you've talked in the past about the importance of using stories. Mm-hmm. What kind of money stories can you tell a client that's going to reassure them, that's going to make them feel better?
Well, I think right now, and I think everybody's different, so I don't want to give like an overly prescriptive recipe right here. But I know I'm just looking about my own experience with Eric, my advisor. We did go through a historical perspective, which I'm sure a lot of advisors are doing, right? Of where the country's been at critical different times, and then how things ended up to sort of shape what the future is going to look like. So I think having, stories or a narrative at least about the historical perspective is a very reassuring way to talk about this. And Eric actually made it fun for me. He had this cool quiz that he used and he made it interactive with me. So it wasn't like this super like dry, boring subject. I think you could also pull stories from the past if you were around. I mean, again, you have to tread because you have to know which clients are going to be okay with these kind of stories. If it's going to freak people out more to talk about 2008 or not, to say, and I know this is a black swan, it's a little bit different, but to liken it to things that have happened in the past and how things have turned around and look, we're even better today, right, than we were back then. Those are good ideas. If there's analogies and metaphors they can use, those are great things to tap into also.
Someone just asked a question. I think it's a really good question. When you are empathic listening, how do you deal with silence? How do you deal with these moments where you feel like you want to jump into the conversation because there is an awkward silence?
You want to take that one, Christine? I can take it, but I feel like I'm
Well,
talking.
It seems that, and I have to say I don't work directly with clients, but it seems that people shouldn't be afraid of silence, that sometimes it's just a signal that someone's thinking. But I also think to the extent that you can bring questions that, again, signal that you've been listening, have follow-up questions that indicate that you're an active participant in this discussion, that you have other clients who have had a similar situation, and here's how we've dealt with it. But I think maybe a key message, not just for client interactions, but for life, is to not be worried about silence, that sometimes it is just someone regrouping and thinking about what they might ask you next.
I agree. And I think, Christine, that to piggyback on that, if there's some silence, It's one thing if you're on a face-to-face, like a Zoom thing, you can see if there's silence, like what's going on. But when it's on a call, you're like, did they hang up, right? You kind of don't know what's happening. So you have a little more latitude when you can see someone visually with extending the silence, because you can see what they're doing. If it's on the phone, you probably want to allow for a little bit shorter amount of time, but I agree, don't be afraid of it. Give people a moment to have silence. And if you're uncertain, like, what do I do? You can ask them something like, so where do you want to go from here? Like, what kind of conversation would be helpful to you?
Let's talk for a moment about how people have responded to the market crash in March of 2020. David and I have done some research on this. It does appear that retirement, or the proximity to retirement, has a big impact on how people respond emotionally to seeing their portfolios drop. What are some things that you can do as an advisor? Because that's a visceral reaction. People have actually done neuroimaging studies, and it's a different part of our brain that responds to a loss like that. It's the more emotional, the ancient part of our brain. How do we deal with that as advisors? How do we help someone through that process?
Who do you want to answer that? Christine, is that yours?
I can take that, Michael. As people may know, I've spent a lot of time toiling over this bucket approach to retirement portfolio planning, and I always have to credit Harold Avensky as sort of the person who put this bug in my ear more than a decade ago, where I was talking to him about retirement planning, and he obviously had a lot of experience with retirement planning with his clients. And we were talking about what works for him in his practice. And he said, well, I just use this bucket approach where I bolt on a cash bucket, and knowing that they have their near-term cash flow needs set aside provides my clients with a lot of peace of mind to put up with whatever long-term portfolio allocation I might be recommending. And for me, that was just such a pivotal moment, because he was telling me that it really worked for his clients behaviorally. And I think that speaks to what you were just talking about, Michael, about how if we have imminent worries that affect things that we have planned within the next couple of years, it makes it really hard to stick with whatever the long-term plan is. So advisors don't necessarily have to do buckets, but I think whatever you can do to assure them that what you have going on now and what constitutes quality of life for you, whether that's meeting your friends for breakfast 3 days a week, or going to the movies with your wife a couple times a week, or whatever it is that is quality of life, or this giant family vacation you had planned, that is not in jeopardy. And I think that's so powerful in terms of making clients, investors stick with their plans and not feel super uncomfortable. But Michael, I will say that I observed a real reticence among many individual investors to de-risk their portfolios coming into this. Like we were saying, rebalance, rebalance, rebalance. Unless they had advisors who were doing it for them, there was a tendency to just kind of let the winners ride and stick it out with equity-heavy portfolios. My guess is that those are some of the investors who you and David observed feeling particularly skittish during this recent market weakness.
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. That's what we found, that there is this tendency after the market's been going up to want to jump on the bandwagon. I think we want to avoid regret, but when the market actually starts falling, then we tend to switch gears significantly. We become very loss averse. And if you look at performance over time, what you see is that a lot of individual investors actually lose return, about 1.5% per year, because they tend to want to invest more when the stock market is more expensive, and they tend to want to invest more in safe assets when the stock market is cheaper, which is the exact opposite of what we're supposed to do, which is, I think, one of the reasons why the bucket strategy, even though a lot of things have been attributed to the bucket strategy that you can't really attribute, it's not magic, but the biggest advantage is that it helps clients manage risk over time. And I know, Deirdre, you've talked about framing and the importance of framing, and really bucketing is an example of a framing type of strategy.
That's Christine, right? Christine's the framing.
Well, one thing I always say when I talk to advisors about bucketing is you don't have to use buckets yourself. That may be not the way that you manage client assets, but I do think the bucket approach is a really great illustration tool for showing them, here's why I'm recommending the approximate allocation that I'm recommending. And by the way, if we encounter some turbulence, maybe it'll be with even the bond portion of your portfolio. If we encounter some turbulence, you have your near-term cash flow needs parked in something that's really safe. And there are more sophisticated ways to do this bucketing than simply holding cash. Wade Pfau has talked about what he calls buffer assets, and it's sort of a bigger tent, and cash would be the most simple form of that, but you could use a reverse mortgage, you could use cash value on a life insurance policy, but the idea is that you're building in buffer assets to keep the client from getting too worried about whatever is happening with the long-term piece of the portfolio. And I do think it's a great framing and illustration tool for advisors.
You've also noted that there's three buckets in the bucket strategy. You have the cash bucket, you have the more bond-heavy bucket that takes a little bit of term risk and a little bit of credit risk. Those are maybe 5 to 10 years of expenses. And then after 10 years, that's the equity part. I mean, first of all, I think it's okay for advisors to say, we're not going to touch that equity part for another 10 years, but I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how long it's going to take for the market to recover. And I think of a certain amount of humility and honesty on the part of an investment advisor is actually valuable. It helps acknowledge that you don't know everything about the market. Neither one of us knows it, but we don't have to touch that for another 10 years. So let's not worry about that right now. We've got the next 10 years taken care of. But Christine, you've noted that second bucket, the sort of 5 to 10 year bucket, something odd happened in March of 2020 that we hadn't seen before recently. What happened?
Yeah, we saw a weird phenomenon where even high quality bonds, and really it was just a couple of days there, but we saw bonds have some sort of liquidity problem. We saw even high quality bond funds incur some losses. Now, most funds have nicely regrouped and recouped those losses since then. But it was something that I was sort of watching and feeling a little troubled by. And I guess one other sort of broader takeaway that we did see during this recent market shock was that we saw treasuries really hold their ground much better than the rest of the bond market. And that has come up a couple of times in the recent past, where we have seen that bifurcation where even high quality corporates have lost ground at the expense of treasuries, and really only treasuries have held out as ballast.
Yeah, not to get too investment geeky, but investors are not really being rewarded that much for taking risk with their bonds right now, are they?
No, and I would have said, though, even a couple of years ago, that it seems like the opportunity cost between cash and bonds right now is really minuscule. I mean, you can find a high yield savings account with a 1.5 or 1.7% yield today, which is pretty close to what you will see on even an intermediate term bond fund. So that yield differential is very narrow. And of course, the interest rate sensitivity is there for the bond fund. You may have FDIC insurance on the cash products as well. So it seems like the problems of overdoing bucket one, of holding too much in cash, feels relatively low today, but again, I would have said that a couple of years ago, and bonds went on to have a tremendous run. So who knows?
I'm going to bring David in here for a moment, because David can comment on the value of delegating. I mean, if this is my responsibility and I'm an investor and the market does what it did in March 2020, I feel like I need to do something. But if I can delegate responsibility for managing my investments to someone else who is an expert, who is an advisor, does that actually help me? And will that actually help me in the long run achieve higher performance on my investments?
Probably. I mean, I think an important point here is that you made this point earlier that advisors help investors stay the course, right? I think that's one of the biggest benefits to working with a financial advisor. You know, and Deirdre, we had a question come in. You know, what does this mean now for being vulnerable? I mean, a lot of advisors position themselves as I'm an investment expert. You know, is acknowledging that you shouldn't have bought invested the money 2 weeks ago. How does that work with messaging?
Well, and I think it depends on the relationship you have with your client and the spirit in which it's said. So my advisor and I have had a 12-year relationship, right? So we've gone through a lot of things together and we've become friends. So he was able to say that to me in a way that didn't feel, I mean, yeah, it's true, right? I think most people know advisors can't predict the market, right? You don't have some crystal ball knowing what's going to happen. So that comment between he and I went over really well. You have to, for that question, you have to decide with your clients or your client, what's the particular response. But we definitely need to do away with this idea industry-wide that being vulnerable ruins or lessens your credibility. If you have the right type of vulnerability, it actually strengthens your relationship with your client. Now, I'm not saying by saying vulnerability, I'm not saying you go out and air all your dirty laundry, right? Like, well, my whole family's collapsing, right? You think of how I feel. I'm not saying that, right? But you can definitely say, yeah, I hear you. This is tough, right? We're all going through some tough times. So, let's talk about what's going to help you get through this. 2 of my clients have created, so this is an idea. This is an idea for everybody who's listening or watching this webinar. 2 of my clients, we've created videos for them to get in front of this situation. And they're sending these videos out to their clients proactively. And okay, this has never happened at my office. There's like a fire alarm right now. Okay, I'm not going to leave because I think it's probably...
Deirdre, we're all watching how you manage this crisis.
Yeah, so whenever something like this happens on a webinar or in a live presentation, you just stay very calm. I'm just going to go out. Let's just make sure that I'm not involved in a fire.
All right.
Good? Okay.
Well, I think this might be a good opportunity, Christine, for you to tell us your story about the 2008 crisis. And you had, what was it, an aunt over visiting while you were on vacation, and your aunt was having a bit of a freak out moment.
Right. We were all in France, and this was 2008, fall of 2008. So really things were starting to look bad. And so my relative was really, really obsessed with what was going on in the market. And of course, we're there for vacation. We had a beautiful pool. We're in this beautiful little village. But she was very focused on what was going on with her investment portfolio. And I think she was probably in her mid-50s at the time. And it comes back to that idea, Michael, of if you can get people focused on their near-term situation. So once we cleared up, okay, you're not planning to retire anytime soon. No. Do you have reason to believe that your job is at risk? No, actually not. I feel really good about my job. So the money in your retirement account really is there for, I don't know, when do you think you might retire? And so she said, well, maybe like 10 years from now. And so finally we were able to get her calmed down by just thinking about, you know what, I'm here, I'm okay, I have a job, I'm not retiring into this crisis. And so I can be comfortable with the fact that even though stocks are down, they probably will recover based on market history. And so again, it was just kind of framing it in terms of sort of imminent financial health, thinking that through, finding comfort with where she was at that time. And then I think she found comfort with what was going on with the long-term portfolio. Now, I assume that it's a different story. If she hasn't de-risked, and I hope she has, she probably has reason to be nervous because she's getting close to retirement.
All right, let's take a moment and talk about the importance of de-risking and of understanding when you have enough and when risk is appropriate and when it is not appropriate. you know, I think a lot of our conversation today has been about trying to get clients to manage risk. But the reality is that risk is real, and there is a downside consequence of risk. And sometimes our job is to get our clients to acknowledge that they have enough, and then to de-risk so that they can actually sleep at night in retirement. So if an event like this happens, they're not facing the stress that they faced last month.
Right. Advisors earn their keep a million times over in terms of helping clients systematically de-risk their portfolio. So you were talking about investor behavior, Michael, where observing cash flows into funds, that we sort of see this persistent pattern where investors underperform because they add assets at the wrong time and they don't peel back, et cetera. One thing we have been kind of watching at Morningstar has been a little bit different pattern than has been the case historically, where even in a great equity market year like 2019, we were seeing major inflows into bond funds. And so and international equity, by the way, which underperformed US. So all we could think by looking at that is that more and more fund flows are being driven by professional investors who are doing this de-risking for clients. So whether financial advisors or target date funds that are systematically rebalancing, my hunch is that people are getting a little bit better at this because they're delegating to professionals who are assisting with that thing that behaviorally is so hard, cutting back on the asset classes that have performed well.
So Christine, you're telling me that advisors actually have value?
Very much so. And I think with that particular issue in relation to portfolios, I think it's just a tremendous value.
So David, what have you seen when it comes to fund flows recently that you think is interesting or surprising, that reflects a difference with what we saw in 2008 and 2009?
So, you know, and Christy made this point, fund flows are actually really hard because you don't necessarily know when a fund is trading, who's trading the fund, right? Whether it's a retail investor or whether it's a professional money manager. I think that, you know, what we can do is, we can look at things like what's happening inside 401k plans. And, when you segment out, participants who are in managed portfolios versus those going on their own, you see this effect over and over again that you mentioned before, which is that investors left to their own devices, are moving to more conservative portfolios. And I think, to your earlier point too, this is where people hurt themselves. But at the same time, who's making this change? It's people close to retirement. And I'm curious, what are the thoughts on how do you communicate to clients who are at retirement that things are going to be okay? That's a question for Christine or Deirdre. What do you, to me, they're the most vulnerable. What do you tell them?
Deirdre, you want to take that? Are you back and situated?
Well, so first of all, you handled that very well, Michael. And
likewise.
I would like to can we just focus on that moment for a minute? Because I think there's a teaching moment there. After that question, could we do that?
By the way, for the audience, that was planned months in advance.
Well, I think it's funny because we were talking about vulnerability and there's all this beautiful love here in the chat. So to the participants, if you feel more connected to me right now after that situation, can you just write yes in the chat for a minute? Because I think that you do. Yes. Okay, look at that. So, okay, look at all that. Yes, that was a vulnerable moment. Would you agree that was a vulnerable moment, right? It was a vulnerable moment because you saw me being very human. That was a real human situation. And the reason why that I stay calm, and you nailed it, thank you. The reason why I stay calm in those situations, reason why my energy can stay there is that I know the value that a moment like that has with my client or with my audience. I know that, okay, as long as I stay calm, this is actually interesting, right? This is real life, and they get to see me as a real live human being like them handling a real life problem. And so that's what I think as advisors, you have to realize, you want your clients to see you as human, even human first and an advisor second.
That's a great point, Deirdre. And it also highlights this idea. Someone just said it's a very Zoom moment.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of Zoom moments over the last couple of months. How is this? I mean, we're all forced now to communicate with each other via technology. Is this going to affect the profession permanently? How has this affected the profession?
I think in a great way. I think that this has made the industry catch up to other industries and use technology where we were a little hesitant to use it before. And I think it gives more options to advisors in terms of their appointments, more options to their clients. If they have snowbird clients, you can see them. You don't have to wait 6 months. For learning purposes, it gives advisors more options. For dealing with the younger generation, all of a sudden, maybe older advisors who weren't so tech savvy and avoided that were forced to be tech savvy, right? So I think it's done some beautiful, beautiful things. And I just want to give this example that I was giving you. This is a great client relationship building strategy you're about to get, and a business building strategy I'm about to give you, but it has to do with technology. So video is an area where the industry, hasn't been using a whole lot of it. And we know video is video, right? I mean, people love video. And so what a few of my clients have done is we've created scripts for them, and they've sent videos out to their client base and to prospects to say, like, hey, I'm human too. This is what my family and I are doing to thrive during this time. So they give a real life human piece of a tip, a strategy. One of them talks about gratitude, having a gratitude journal. The other one talks about their mindset and doing meditative yoga every morning with their wife, but they're acknowledging that they're human too, they're vulnerable too. How am I keeping my energy up? This is how I'm doing it. It's a tip you can use. And by the way, here's where the markets are at, and here's where they're likely to go. Do you know both of those clients, those advisors, immediately brought in new business from that video, got referrals, and their videos started being passed along. And their clients started emailing and saying, thank you so much for putting out this video. Love your ideas and love that you're staying in front of me.
Someone just made the point that this means that you don't have to live near your advisor. And Christine, I'd like to get your viewpoint on the impact that this has on specialization among advisors.
Yeah, I think that was a trend that was already well underway before the current crisis, but I do expect that, like so many other things in our lives, I think that the crisis will hasten the focus on specialization in the advisory space, where you could be the person who has helped cardiologists sell their practice, for example. And if you're that person, and I'm a cardiologist who is 62, that really speaks to my need. I want someone who has dealt with people in exactly my situation. So I think that we will see more of that specialization. I think as demographics, as younger clients age, I think they'll all be more comfortable with technology. So I think that, we'll continue to see the uptake of this trend. And I love the idea of advisors holding conferences, seminars for their clients online. And one neat thing about the technology aspect of this versus the physical travel aspect is that you may actually be able to upgrade the quality of speakers, because you're not making this ask that I need you to physically, be in my office or be at this hotel on X date. All you need to do is be there for a half hour. You're an author who I really respect, and I'd like my clients to get to know you. It seems like the ask is a little easier for advisors who are putting on events like that to reach out to authors, thought leaders, people they respect, to get them to participate in their conferences.
Yeah, and Deirdre, what can we do to be a Zen communicator using technology?
Yeah.
Like, what are some of the secrets? I mean, a lot of advisors are just feeling this thing out. A lot of them have been doing it for a long time. Yep. But some are saying, well, wow, I can make an appointment with my client. I can meet with them more frequently, and they don't have to drive to my office. It's a way more efficient. I can do it for 15 minutes. What are some other things that we should think about when we're communicating with clients?
Yeah, I'm happy to give you strategies, but I don't want to. So I'm watching the chat too, and I'm listening, and there are a few questions for me there, but also I don't want to feel like we were avoiding that. What do you say to someone close to retirement question? I think for me, before I jump into that, for me, it goes back to that affirming empathy. Like, that's a tough situation, and you need to acknowledge, I think, that it's a tough situation. If that's the word they use, mirror back the words that they're using, show that you understand, take the time they need, and then I'm going to defer to the financial experts for strategy. That's definitely not my bailiwick where I'm going to tell you what strategy I would use with them, but from human to human, emotional empathy, emotional connection, communication strategy, that's where that listening that Christine was talking about, that empathy, that question asking, that not rushing them is going to be absolutely critical.
Deirdre, I'll just jump in there too to address sort of the financial planning aspect of this. I guess the way I would approach it is that my hope is that you would be able to say to the client, this is what we planned for, that your plan is actually built for this sort of event that we very much anticipated. We didn't know specifically that it would be a pandemic like this, but we knew that there would be some market shock, and your plan is built to support you during such periods because we know sequencing risk is such a problem that it's built to help provide your cash flows even if you happen to be planning to retire into a weak market. And I think also, it's incumbent upon the advisor to take a close look at the plan and just see what the levers are. That if the plan is in serious distress because of the market's recent losses, then it seems like it's incumbent upon the advisor to walk through, well, here are the levers that we can explore, whether it is continuing to work in some fashion, part-time perhaps, just to explore all of the different variables, portfolio related and non-portfolio related.
Nice, well done. Okay, so back to your question about virtual, right? Okay.
Yeah, how do you do it better?
So there's two scenarios. So there's the kind of the one-on-one virtual meeting, and then there might be the running the seminar or talking to a group of clients, right? So let's look at the one-on-one scenario, because a lot of the one-on-one is going to transfer to the group situation, but the group not necessarily to the one-to-one. So I want to give a couple of group strategies also. So the first thing for either situation is you have to know your platform. So take time to practice with whatever platform you're using. So whether it's Zoom or WebEx or whatever it is, don't practice it on a client. Get on with a friend or a colleague to make sure you know the ins and outs the best you can of your platform. The second thing is just to think of basics like what's behind you, the lighting, the sound. So making sure from a tech quality, things are good. And then, the third would be try to simulate your face-to-face in-person meetings the best that you can. So think of ways to do that. Some of the ways my advisor clients are doing that is, first of all, be face-to-face. I know there's a subset of advisors who don't want to show their face. Like I get on a call with them and we're on Zoom, but they don't show their face. And I'm like, that's the point of Zoom. Show your face, right? So show your clients your face. They want to see your face. The human face, particularly when things are uncertain, is really important. They need to see your calm, confident demeanor and energy. The next thing is, if you like to sketch out ideas on a white pad, like a legal pad or whatever when you're in the office, just get a small whiteboard, and you can do that right there in front of them, and you can hold up the whiteboard so you can be sketching ideas in real time. Another strategy is to log. If you have an iPad or a Surface Pro where you can draw on it, log in as you, like we are right now, and then log in again on your iPad. And then when it comes time to offer a sales idea or a strategy idea, you can start drawing, and the iPad will show up on the screen, and it looks like you're watching real-time drawing. That is a great way to simulate a meeting. If you have illustrations you use a lot across different clients and you draw them out, take a picture of them, and then you can screen share them. So save those as slides so that you can easily refer to them. So those are some one-on-one strategies. Anything else or anything you want more clarification on before I move to some basic seminar and group strategies?
Well, I talked to you. There's one of the questions that someone asked is, what about older clients? do you think that this is still gonna do the trick for older clients? We just did a family Zoom a couple weeks ago, and my 92-year-old uncle was on it, and he'd never done it before, and he actually got up to speed pretty quickly, and he seemed to enjoy it. I think that just the human connection aspect of it, of course, technology can seem scary, yep. But giving it a try, I think, is the important step.
I agree. I think older clients, my 101-year-old grandmother got on it for her 101st birthday a couple of weeks ago too, right? And she managed it. So usually they need someone to help them. And with a lot of people home these days, hopefully there's someone in their house that can help them out. I would say you try it, but give the client the option. If they're like, that's just too overwhelming, then you can obviously get on the phone. And hopefully here, depending on what state you're on, in a couple of weeks, people will have the choice to come back into your office if they want to or not. But I think giving them the option, but don't write the older people off. A lot of my relatives are older and they're actually having fun with this. It's a new thing for them. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is a whole new world. So I'd say, I think go for it.
Yeah, I think the fact that you set the appointment, that you make the connection, that's really, and acknowledging the need for human contact and not being shy of the technology. I think that's an important aspect of this.
Yes. Do you want some group strategies?
Yeah, let's talk about group strategies.
All right, this is my sweet spot. This is what I live for. Is the live presentation and the virtual presentations to a group. Okay, so a couple of things that you want to ensure is the first thing you have to realize when you are putting on, I'm just going to call it a webinar, okay, to use a broad term. When you're putting on a webinar, not only are you now host or presenter, but you're also event producer. So you have to take into account all of the things that are going on in the event, not just the words that you're saying. So as an example, in order to produce this event, right, Jared had to set it up, but then Michael and Christine and I had to figure out who's saying what when and how are we doing this. So that required us to meet in advance, right, to figure that out and to get Michael some information. And he sent us questions about what he might be asking us. Then when we get on early, make sure everyone's on and everyone can be seen well. Then, okay, who's going first? Who's going next? Like, you need to plan out who's talking when. Those aren't things you want to be deciding on the call in front of your clients. Now, once in a while, it might be like, wait, who's going to do that? Like Christine and I have been like, I think that's Christine's question. That kind of thing is okay. But I think you can see that this is a choreographed event that was planned in advance so that you would have the best user experience. You have to be thinking like an event producer. So that's number one. Number two, do not train your audience to be late or frustrate or bore them. So let me tell you what many presenters do that trains their audiences to be late. And Michael, we didn't even talk about this tip, and you did a great job today because you didn't do what I'm about to say not to do, which is awesome. So I'll point out what you did do. So a lot of times when someone's running a webinar, it'll be, let's say, the top of the hour, and let's say they're planning 20 people to be on and there's only 5, they will say something like, well, there's only 5 people on right now, so we're going to wait and give a chance for everyone else to get on. And then they might wait and wait. And the people who are on are thinking, what am I, chopped liver, right? And so you want to always cater and honor the time of the people who showed up on time, not cater to the people who are late. And so for me, I always start my webinars at 2 minutes after the hour because I do want to give that buffer of different time, different clocks being off. So make a rule that you're going to start, let's say your webinar starts at 2, you're going to start between 2 and 2:02 at the latest. And if you're someone, let's say maybe you're a field leader and you have a weekly meeting, or you're doing it like the colleges where you're having a series. If people know that you start on time, you will not train them to be late. But if you're always waiting till 7 minutes, 10 minutes after the hour, your people will start showing up 7 minutes to 10 minutes after the hour because they know nothing happens before that. The other thing you don't want to do that most presenters do, and this is what you didn't do, Michael, is they open with what's called the unpleasant pleasantries. They open with, oh, thanks for coming today. This is so great. Let me tell you all the announcements. Let me tell you about the CE. Let me tell you this, blah, 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 blah. Nobody cares. It's a waste of time, right?
So they care about the CE.
Well, they do. They do care about that. Unpleasant pleasantries, they don't care about. But what you did today, Michael, is you framed up what the conversation was going to be. You framed up the benefit they were going to get from listening, and then you said, okay, we got a couple of housekeeping things to attend to. So that's how you want to do that. You want to open with a bang. And open with a bang means knowing you only have 5 to 30 seconds to get people tuned in or deciding if they're going to hang up or tune you out. You've got to open with something powerful the first 5 to 30 seconds. You've got to frame up the benefit they're going to get. And then you can say, but before we jump in, there's a couple of housekeeping items. Or before we jump in, there's a few announcements. The other option is you can give your announcements at the end of the presentation if it's not something they need in the presentation like your audience needed today. So does that make sense? I want to make sure that that makes sense. One of the most powerful ways to open any meeting, any presentation, is to ask the audience a you-focused question that has something to do with the content and gets them thinking about themselves. Because brain science shows it's nearly impossible to ignore someone when they're asking you a you-focused question. We want to answer and think about ourselves.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. And how do we find the right topics for a first webinar?
Well, what I recommend my clients do is think about their ideal clients. So if your ideal clients are business owners, then, maybe the PPP, right, would be a great topic. Or if they're, going through a divorce, how would this relate to that type of life change? So think about who your ideal clients are and who you want to attract, and pick a topic that is going to cater to that demographic, that psychographic. Or a spin on the topic that would cater to them. It might be this very similar information that you'd give across different niches, but put the spin that's going to appeal to those people you usually serve and want to attract.
Thank you, Deirdre. And I think that's a fantastic idea because in 2 weeks, we will be having an expert talking about the PPP program and other tax planning strategies for advisor. I'm going to take a moment and thank you, Deirdre, and thank you, Christine, for being on our webcast, and thank you, David Blanchett, as well. Thanks to the audience for attending. This was the second in a 4-part webcast series tackling COVID-19's impact from all angles. 2 weeks from today, May 14th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, I'm confident in saying will be one of the most impactful webcasts you will join during the crisis. We will be joined by Robert Keebler, one of the most influential tax practitioners in the nation, and Jeffrey Levine, lead writer at Kitces.com and a recent Investment News 40 Under 40 recipient, to discuss COVID-19's impact on tax and retirement planning. If you are listening to this, you are already registered and you will receive a reminder email the day before the webcast. Thank you again, David, Christine, and Deirdre. Be safe and well, and continue to be the pillars of guidance for your clients and your communities. We'll talk again on May 14th. Thanks again.